Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations present Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the air and The World of Worlds by H.G. Wells. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Carl Phillips speaking to you from the observatory in Princeton. I'm standing in a large semicircular room, pitch black except for an oblong split in the ceiling. Although I can see through this opening a little sprinkling of stars that cast kind of a frosty glow over the intricate mechanisms of the huge telescope. The ticking sound you hear is the vibration of the clockwork. Professor Pearson stands directly above me on a small platform, peering through a giant lens. I ask you to be patient, ladies and gentlemen, during any delay that might arise in our interview. Besides his ceaseless watch of the heavens, Professor Pearson might be interrupted by a telephone or other communications. During this period, he is in constant touch with the astronomical centers of the world. Professor, may I begin our questions? At any time, Mr. Phillips. Professor, would you please tell our radio audience exactly what you observe on the planet Mars through your telescope? Nothing usual at the moment, Mr. Phillips. A red disk is swimming in a blue sea, transverse stripes across the disk. Quite distinct now, because Mars happens to be the point nearest the Earth, in opposition, as we call it. In your opinion, what do these transverse stripes signify, Professor Pearson? Knocking cows, I can assure you, Mr. Phillips. Although that's a popular conjure of those who imagine Mars to be inhabited, from a scientific standpoint, the stripes are merely the result of atmospheric conditions peculiar to the planet. Then you're quite convinced as a scientist that living intelligence as we know it does not exist on Mars. I'd say the chances are about 1,000 to 1. And yet, how do you account for those gas eruptions on the surface of the planet at regular intervals? Mr. Phillips, I cannot account for it. By the way, Professor, for the benefit of our listeners, how far away is Mars from the Earth? Approximately 40 million miles. Well, that seems safe enough to be. Thank you. Just a moment, ladies and gentlemen. Someone has just handed Professor Pearson a message. While he reads it, let me remind you that we are speaking to you from the observatory in Princeton, where we are interviewing the world-famous astronomer, Professor Pearson. One moment, please. Professor Pearson has just passed me a message, which he has just received. Professor, may I read the message to the listening audience? Certainly, Mr. Phillips. Ladies and gentlemen, I shall read you a message wired to Professor Pearson's from Dr. Gray of the National History Museum, New York, at 9:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Seismograph registered shock of almost earthquake intensity occurring within the radius of 20 miles of Pearson. Please investigate, signed Lloyd Gray, Chief of Astronomical Division. Professor Pearson, what could this occurrence possibly have to do with the disturbances observed on the planet Mars? This is probably a meteorite of unusual size, and its arrival at this particular time is merely coincidence. However, we're going to conduct a search as soon as daylight permits. Thank you, Professor. Ladies and gentlemen, for the past 10 minutes, we've been speaking to you from the observatory in Princeton, bringing you a special interview from Professor Pearson, noted astronomer. This is Carl Phillips speaking. We are returning you now to our New York station.
We now take you to Grover's Mill, New Jersey, the site of the meteorite crash.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Carl Phillips again at the Wilmot Farm, Grover's Mill, New Jersey. Professor Pearson and myself have made the 11-mile journey from Princeton in about 10 minutes. Well, I hardly know where to begin to paint for you a word picture of the strange scene before my eyes. It's like something out of modern Arabian Nights. Well, I just got here and I haven't the chance to look around yet. I guess that's it. Yeah, I guess that's the thing. Directly in front of me, buried in a vast pit. It must have been struck with terrific force. The ground is covered with splinters of a tree, and it must have struck on the way down. From what I can see, the object doesn't look very much like a meteor, at least not the meteors I've seen. It looks more like a huge cylinder. It has a diameter of about 30 yards. The metal in the sheath is, well, I've never seen anything like it. The color is a yellowish white. Curious spectators are now pressing close to the object in spite of the efforts of the police to push them back. They're getting in my line of sight. Can you move them to the side, please? Well, while the policemen are pushing the crowd back, here's Mr. Wilth, owner of the farm here. He may have some interesting facts to add. Mr. Wilth, could you please tell the radio audience here as much as you remember about the rather unusual visitor that dropped in your backyard? Step closer, please, ladies and gentlemen. This is Mr. Wilth.
Well, I was listening to the radio.
Closer and louder, please.
Pardon me?
Louder and closer, please.
Yes, sir. Well, I was listening to the radio and kind of drowsing. That professor fellow was talking about Mars, so I was half dozing.
Yes, Mr. Wilth, and then what happened?
As I was saying, I was listening to the radio and kind of halfway.
Yes, Mr. Wilth, and you saw something?
not first off. I heard something.
And what did you hear?
A hissing sound like this. Kind of like a 4th of July rocket.
And then what?
Turned my head out the window and would have swore I was asleep and dreaming.
Yes?
I seen a kind of greenish streak, and then zingo! Something smacked the ground, knocked me clear out of my chair.
What were you frightened, Mr. Wilmot?
Well, I ain't quite sure. I reckon I was kind of riled.
Thank you, Mr. Wilmot. Thank you.
You want me to tell you some more?
No, that's quite all right. That's plenty. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just heard Mr. Wilmot, owner of the farm where this thing has fallen. I wish I could convey the atmosphere, the background of this fantastic scene. Hundreds of cars are parked in the field back of us. Police are trying to rope off the roadway leading to the farm, but it's no use. They're breaking right through. Car's headlights now in an enormous spot in the pit where the object's half buried. Some of the more daring souls are now venturing toward the edge. Their silhouettes stand out against the metal sheen. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there's something I haven't mentioned to you in all this excitement, but now it's becoming more distinct. Perhaps you've already caught ear of it on your radio. Listen to this. Do you hear it? It's kind of a curious humming sound that seems to come from inside the object. I'll move the microphone nearer. Now we're not more than 25 feet away. Can you hear it now? Oh, Professor Pearson. Yes, Mr. Phillips? Can you tell us the meaning of that scraping noise inside the thing? Possibly the unequal cooling of its surface. I see. Do you still think it's a meteor, Professor? I don't know what to think. The metal casing is definitely extraterrestrial. It's not found on this Earth. Friction with the Earth's atmosphere usually tears holes in a meteorite. This thing is smooth, and as you can see, of cylindrical shape. Just a minute. Something's happening, ladies and gentlemen. This is terrific. The end of the thing is beginning to flake off. The top is rotating like a screw. The thing must be hollow. Good heavens, something's wriggling out of the shadow like a gray snake. Now another one, and another. They look like tentacles to me. There, I can see the thing's body. It's large as a bear, and it glistens like wet leather. But that face, ladies and gentlemen, it's indescribable. I can hardly force myself to keep looking at it. Their eyes are black, and it gleams like a serpent. The mouth is a V shape with saliva dripping from its rimless lips. It seems to quiver and pulsate. The monster, whatever, is hardly moving. It seems weighed down by possibly gravity or something. The thing's raising up now. The crowds are falling back. They've seen plenty. This is the most extraordinary experience. I can't find words. I'll pull this microphone with me as I talk. I have to stop the description until I can take a new position. Hold on, will you please? I'll be right back in a minute.
We are bringing you an eyewitness account of what's happening on the Wilmoth Farm, Grover's Mill, New Jersey. We now return you to Carl Phillips at Grover's Mill.
A humped shape. It is rising out of the pit. I can make it out as a small beam of light against a mirror. What is that? There's a jet of flame springing from the mirror. It leaps at the advancing men. It strikes the pit. Good Lord, they're turning to the flames. Now the whole field's caught fire. The woods, the barns, the gas tanks of automobiles. It's spreading everywhere. It's coming this way, about 20 yards to my right.
Ladies and gentlemen, due to circumstances beyond our control, we are unable to continue the broadcast from Grover's Mill. Evidently, there's some difficulty with our field transmission. However, we will return to that point at the earliest opportunity. In the meantime, we have a late bulletin from San Diego, California. Professor Indilkoffer, speaking at a dinner of the California Astronomical Society, expressed the opinion that the explosions on Mars are undoubtedly nothing more than severe volcanic disturbances on the surface of the planet. We now continue with our piano interlude.
You have been listening to a CBS presentation of Orson Welles in the Mercury Theater on the Air, an original dramatization of The World of Worlds by H.G. Wells. The performance will conclude now for Episode 1. This is the Columbia Broadcasting System. Thank you for listening.